Hey Lulu, hope you're doing well. Hope you and Mike are doing well. Hope your weekend is going awesome, and thank you for sending this over. That snow day was a mess. So I was coaching that night because my business partner Kurt, he was homesick. So a lot of people didn't show up. So it was like a good opportunity to like kind of like get a workout in while the while the gym was open. I just had some soda, so like I'm trying to just like keep everything as not disgusting as I possibly can. Okay, so going into it, thank you for sending over your videos. The way that you filmed your videos were fantastic. I'm very happy with you getting the footage that you did. There's just two things. First things first, if you want to send me more videos, you are more than welcome to do so. At the very least, it should be top sets like what you just did. But if you wanted to send me like your accessory movements or something like that every once in a while to let me know, like, or to get some form checks or anything like that, let me know. But I know that you're pretty confident in your movements as it is. But doing the work on the comp movements is one thing. But if you want to send me other videos and you're not sure about like how you should approach something or like what you should do in a certain area, feel free to email me and also include those questions or concerns in your check-in. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that like while this is great and while this is awesome information and already you're doing a really good job at like starting off on a really great foot with remote coaching, I do want to just invite you to I want you to know that I can do more for you, and I would invite you to just send over whatever you feel you want me to take a look at, because that's what you paid me for. So with that being said, let's get into the check-in. So overall, I sent you like a 3 main points on the squat, bench, and 2 main points on the deadlift for you to focus on. I want you to include these points in your email next week or this week just to see if like we're staying on top of what we really need to be focusing on primarily. So starting off with squat. So you'll see the first point says break at the knees and hips slowly and simultaneously. So what we're seeing a little bit on your squat is as follows. So, if you think about like the squat, right, and how you're sitting back, what you should be thinking about here is breaking your hips and knees simultaneously, like so, right? So notice that like if I break at the hips and knees at the same time, like I'm sitting down in a chair, this would be generally the best way to approach the movement. To a degree, when you're starting off your squat, you will generally start off the squat like this, all right? So you will start off very jerky at your hip, and then your knees go forward. But what that does is it greatly affects the way in which your back angle will be, and your back angle will greatly affect what muscle groups you tap into. And not only that, but your back angle will also tap into what is most efficient and also what is most inefficient. So with respect to efficiency, we know that efficiency is mainly making sure that the bar is staying over the middle of your foot, because the middle of your foot is your center of gravity, right? So if you break at the hips primarily, right? If you break at the hips primarily, notice that if I push my butt back first, I'm already at a very forward back angle, right? And my bar is going to be over the middle, over my toes, rather than over the middle of my foot. So again, if I break at the hips, I'll have to lean forward to a very high degree like so, and that'll put a lot more stress on my hamstrings and my lower back and glutes. So basically anything posterior, right? Now, if I break at my hands and hips and knees at the same time, notice that I'm breaking evenly like so, and notice that my back angle is significantly higher, right? So I'm going into a very even distribution of my hip muscles and the muscles that support the hips. So for example, like my hips are going to innervate my hamstrings, my glutes, my lower back, and to a very small degree my upper back and my calves. If I drive my knees forward, I also have the help of my quads and anything anterior to me. And also on top of that, I'm keeping the bar over the middle of my foot. So when you do this next, film yourself from the 45-degree angle that you filmed yourself originally, but also I would like to see another set of you filming yourself directly from the profile view just to see what how well we're keeping in the bar over the middle of our foot. So that's what I mean by breaking at the hips and knees simultaneously. So what I would suggest going into this upcoming week, is breaking at the hips and knees slowly to make sure that you're doing this correctly, and then picking up pace as time goes on, or as your rep goes on. Your second point is focus on depth. So with the second point, right now it kind of looks like you're right at parallel. So it looks like you're potentially just right below parallel. So as you're coming down, you'll be stopped kind of right here, when we really want to be confidently having the hip crease below the knee joint. So this type of depth is more so what I'm seeing, and we're seeing something more so like this. I totally believe you that you may think that you're coming down low, but since we want to get you into a competition at some point sooner rather than later and get you ready for that, obviously we're not going to rush things or anything like that, but we really got to focus on hitting competition spec depth. So we really want to make sure that your hip is passing below your knees. So that's the main reason why I want you to film for the profile view, other than making sure that you are hitting your depth, and other than making sure that you are breaking at the hips and knees and staying over the middle of your foot. So go deeper, all right? The third thing to focus on is to catch your bounce. So you have a bit of a tendency, and this is something we were working on when we were in person, but there's a little bit of a tendency to pause at the bottom of your squat. It'll typically take you about 2 seconds for you to go from a standing position to below parallel, right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is to increase this descent of your speed a little bit. Count 1, 2, and then bounce. Okay, so the biggest focus from a performance perspective going into your next week is going to make sure that you're doing a really, really good job at bouncing out of the bottom of the position and really enjoying the performance benefits of bouncing versus pausing and then having to drive from a zero position, right? So, for example, what I mean by that is that if you are running as fast as you possibly can and you're racing someone right next to you, if you were to stop in the middle of that race for just 1 second and then have to go back to running as fast as you possibly can, the person who's racing you will beat you by a long shot, right? So consider that that's what's happening when you're squatting. As you're coming down, your body is basically sprinting to get this done, and then the moment that you stop, you're literally making it harder for yourself, and it's unnecessary, right? So keep in mind that when you do your competition squat, make sure that you catch a bounce for yourself. Make sure that you make it as easy as you can for yourself, so that way you can move some heavier weights in the future versus having a pause, potentially risk injury, potentially risk the opportunity to really feel what it's like to move weight in a competition sense, and to go from there. So the other thing that I would highly recommend, and I'm not going to put this in here because I think 3 cues are way more than enough to focus on, but I would also play around with your stance. You may want to go a little bit narrower, point your toes out a little bit more, so that way that you're confidently hitting depth and that you feel like you're in a really good position to kind of strengthen that as time goes on. Because remember, the big theory lesson that I want to impart in you is that strength is basically an equation of how familiar you are with the movement and how much muscle mass do you have. So we want to take these next couple of weeks to really focus in on form, focus in on what you feel most comfortable and confident in your positions, so that way we can then build on top of those foundations. But we got to make sure that those foundations are sound before we start reaching for higher level situations. So on bench press, the main 3 points: consistent touch point, pause a little bit longer, and focus on scapular position. So to start off with consistent bench point, as you're coming down, some reps will be below breast, some reps will be on breast, and some reps will be well past breast, right? So really heavily focus on making sure that you're making contact right where a sports bra would end. Okay, so if you imagine wearing a sports bra, imagine hitting right at the point where it stops being a sports bra, right? So that area where your sternum kind of starts, that's really where you want to make contact on your chest every single time. The more confident and the more stable that you can be at that bottom position, the easier it's going to be for you to increase your strength in that position, right? So very similar to what we talked about with strength theory in general. So as you're coming down, you really want to try your best to really think about touching softly and confidently. You cannot be bouncing or being unstable at the bottom of the position, because that will only increase your press command in the competition. So as you're coming down or as you unrack the bar, you're going to think about two things. And this is kind of going into scapular position. You're going to unrack the bar, and you're going to think about pulling your shoulder blades down as hard as you possibly can. So really try to think about your shoulder blades pinching together. And then once they pinch together, think about pulling them down, all right? Pulling them down will flare your ribs. So notice that I pull my shoulder blades back, but then if I pull them down, notice that my ribs kind of pop out, right? So you really want to make sure that you're not only squeezing the bar as hard as you possibly can, but unracking the bar, pulling your shoulder blades back, and then closing down as hard as you possibly can. And that's going to be incredibly helpful to making sure that you're keeping your shoulder blades and shoulder joint as stable and tight as possible, so that way your bench press is more so using your muscles and not your joints to move the weight. Lastly, pause a little bit longer. So at the pauses, sometimes we're a little short, so we really want to just make sure that the pauses are as confident as possible. The pause generally should be 1 Mississippi at the bottom of your position, but not like teetering or anything like that. When you make contact, it should be solid and then punch, okay? On the deadlift, there's really two things. I think your deadlift looks great in general, but there's really two things that we got to focus on. Keeping your knees forward and locking your elbows and pulling your chest up. So from here, the main issue here is that with keeping your knees forward is that the moment that you break the bar off the ground, your knees will kick back to a very high degree, putting a lot of emphasis on your hamstrings, right? So again, when I break the bar off the ground, this happens really quickly, right? So when you break the bar off the ground, you should keep your knees forward until everything locks out above the knee. The main reason behind that is that as you keep your knees forward, your quads will be able to help push the ground away as hard as possible. So really try your best to really focus very, very heavily on pushing, driving your heels into the ground as your knees stay forward and shins stay forward until you're above the knee, and then lock everything out at the same time. This will just simply get your quads a little bit more involved in the lift, and will help out with just making sure that you have more musculature to support that breaking off the floor position. The last thing is really just locking your elbows out and pulling the slack out of the bar. So what's happening a lot of times in your video is that when you're when you're deadlifting the bar up, there's a loud click that happens where basically you break the bar. As soon as you break the bar off the floor, you get pitched forward, and then you have to kind of like increasingly fight for that position. So there's a slight click because there's not enough tension being placed in your hands into the barbell. So you're going to lock your elbows out as hard as you possibly can. And then with your elbows locked out, you're going to pull your chest up as tall as you possibly can. So that way when you break the bar off the floor, you should be able to lead with your chest the moment you break off the floor rather than getting pitched forward. And on top of that, you should be able to then allow yourself to really think about using your upper back in the lift a lot more than you are right now, okay? So no click, no sound off the floor. It should be silent. You should have all the slack taken out of the bar before you lead with your chest, okay? So with that being said, Lulu, that's all I've got for you this week. Let me know if you have any questions for me. Otherwise, I will talk to you soon, and have a great rest of your weekend. Talk to you soon. Bye.